Well, that was a great lead-in by Joe, and I appreciate, it's going to save me a little bit of time on molecular markers here. So, but it's been a great collaborative arrangement. I just want to acknowledge the co-authors on this paper, and as you can see, we have several nematologists, many of them in this room, and you can see it's a very national effort all the way to the East Coast as well. So, with that, this is very redundant with Joe's. We try not to be redundant, but again, we will show this. So we know russet-skinned, quarantined, first detected in Long Island very early on, recently detected in Quebec. Pallida, detected in Idaho in 2006, and Elentone as well in Oregon and Idaho in 2008. And I sort of put these up too because you nematologists do such a beautiful job with your pictures. I like having those up here too. Each of the 3 nematologists associated with this project contributed those pictures. So following the discovery of pallida in Idaho, we quickly looked at the Aberdeen program to assess where we might have resistance already present in the program. And so we started out working with the nematologists in Oregon, Idaho, as well as in New York to assess. We had 9 cultivars, European and New Zealand background, 13 breeding lines that had New York material at 121 in their background. We were curious to see how the resistance might appear in the screenings. And then we had susceptible controls, Desiree and Russet Burbank. And again, the nematologists involved. And those are the pathotypes that have been indicated for their screenings in terms of the pallida most closely seems to be pallida 2-3 types that are found in Europe. Russet-skinned, row 1, and Elentone does not have its own pathotype yet. So we have 4 to 6 plots per cultivar breeding line. And I will refer you, our standard susceptible is Desiree. I'm going to refer you to a recently published online article. And if you want more details on the screening and the results, that is the one by Whitworth et al. Here, and it's online now as a first look in plant disease. So the idea was to identify resistance within the Aberdeen breeding program and utilize that resistance, those parents in hybridizations to the long russet-skinned parents to develop the market class that we are looking for out here in the West, which is the predominant market class for processing for fresh pack. So these are the screening results. I apologize, it might be a little small for those in the back of the room, but basically, remember, Desiree is our susceptible, and this goes back to the European bulletin here, where there's a standard scoring notation with a relative susceptibility, and this would be 2 Desiree. You can see less than 1 receiving a score of 9, similar to Desiree as susceptible receiving a score of 1. So 1 being very susceptible to PCN, 9 being highly resistant on the scale. And when you look at the evaluations that were conducted, so you have pallida, Elentone, russet-skinned, what immediately we see with this type is if you look down here, you can see the average resistance that comes across in these screenings across all 3 species there. And what is interesting, right away you see pretty moderate resistance in this 5.6, 5.7 with Elentone and russet-skinned, but as Joe had indicated, less resistance seen with pallida. That is a polygenic type resistance, a little more difficult to work with. What was interesting too is pretty much if you saw high levels of resistance to russet-skinned and Elentone, it seemed to correlate. So resistance to one correlated in general with resistance to the other. That was not the case with pallida, however. as you can see there. So the ones that sort of were on the top of the list with moderate resistance to pallida and high resistance to russet-skinned and alentone were the 4 there. And right away, we started working with those 4, one of them being Eden, as you can see. And that is what the population we're calling A10915. So Eden by Western russet. Western russet means susceptible to all types of potato cyst nematode. So we generated the family back in 2010. TPS germinated, 251 plantlets in culture, and screened with molecular markers. And these were the markers that Joe had referred to, as you can see with the genes involved. So H1, GPOD4, and GPOD5. So here are the molecular markers with respect to specific for Eden. There you can see Eden has the molecular marker for GPOD4, GPOD2, and H1. Western russet, the other susceptible parent, none of those markers associated with resistance. Again, the reference potato varieties, as you can see, similar to Western, russet Burbank has none of the markers associated with resistance. Innovator, as an example, has 2 markers, and Tokyo, which is very unique, has markers for all 4. And when we look at the segregation for these markers, again, that gives you an indication of resistance, but you can see right away it's interesting where when you look at GPOD4, you have about a 1-to-1 segregation, which would be typical of Eden up here being simplex. So it carries the GPOD4, 1 copy of that. So that's a genetic segregation ratio that we would expect. You look at H1 though, and it gets much more interesting. There we have, it appears to be duplex for H1. So Eden in that case, which is good, because then we get a 5-to-1. We get a higher level, a higher number of segregates with resistance. So that's very good. So this population, tubers were produced in the greenhouse in Aberdeen with the tissue culture plantlets obtained from Joe, and grown in the field in Aberdeen in 2017, and 224 progeny. We actually conducted agronomic selection using the marker data that Joe had already gleaned. We selected 14%, or 31, and I'm going to present some of the progeny from that. So just bringing you back, this is Eden, our resistant parent, Western russet susceptible. And these were 2 of the progeny that we selected in the field just in the fall of 2017. I was very happy to see this. This is not always the case. A lot of the European material tends to be round, oval, yellow flesh, and it's difficult sometimes to get the long shape and russet skin that you're looking for. So this is, we were quite happy to see examples of these type of progeny from that cross in the field. Now, when we look at the total number of selected progeny, of the 30 we had marker data on, 25 had what appeared to be H1, and 20 had GPOD4, and both having 16 at that point. And these 2 progeny you see before you both have the 2 markers associated with resistance to PCN, so both russet-skinned as well as pallida. Alentone was interesting. Like what we had talked about, both these individuals, as an example again, had resistance to alentone, where they had no cysts from the screenings conducted by Dr. Zasada, Inga. So, whereas an average of 14 cysts for Western russet. So again, the H1 appears to be conferring resistance to alentone, which is very good. Now on the pallida side, much more interesting. So here you see Western russet, and this is our screenings conducted by Louise Marie. Western russet, almost 200 cysts, and this is replicated over 2 years. Now we have Eden, the resistant parent, and here are the 2 progeny. So a very significant reduction in the number of pallida cysts with the addition of the GPOD4 coming from Eden. just shots some of the processing. Obviously, we're looking at a Western market class. We need to have some processing ability there too. And this is just showing russet Burbank. These are stored at 45 for 3 months, and here is one of the clones showing very comparable or better fry processing than what we see with russet Burbank. So Joe talked about that with Dalton et al., the pyramiding of genes. So right now in this population, we have GPA4 only, remember, okay? So we want to work towards pyramiding with GPA5 and other pallida resistance genes. So this past spring, we conducted, from the progeny we selected the fall in 2017, we conducted hybridizations with many of the European cultivars that were mentioned by, especially the newer ones, by Dr. Kuhl in his previous presentation. So we generated 31 families at this point. We have about a third of our berries from the hybridizations yet to go, so I'm assuming that's going to rise even further. So we have about 2/3 of our berries with the seed extracted. And in the segregating hybrid progeny, we're anticipating with the European varieties we have predominantly having GPA5, the A10915 group having GPA4, we're very excited to think we're going to start pyramiding even higher levels of resistance. And this is a quote from Dalton et al., which relates back up to here. So with GPA4 and 5, you have a great reduction even relative to just having one gene being present, either GPA4 or GPA5. And this is future work, so Joe will continue looking at analysis of the progeny with SNP, the SNP chip version 3, looking to associate newer SNPs with pallida resistance and additional resistance loci to see if we can identify others that may be contributing as well. So just a summary, we have PCM-resistant hybrids of Eden by Western that exhibit the desired longer tuber shape and russet skin that we're looking for in the Western market class, which predominates. Marker system selection proved very valuable for us last fall, walking through the field and making selections that have the marker data. And that's the great relationship that you can have with nematologists as well as molecular biologists from the breeding standpoint. I mean, for me, that's the perfect thing about working in science, are the relationships you build. And we've successfully hybridized now the A10915 progeny with European and New Zealand varieties with up to 31 families plus probably. And we're looking to increase resistance even further in the material that we currently have, but which will also have the long type and russeting that's needed for the West. And with that, I do believe our work can contribute to an integrated approach for both containment as well as eradication of pallida in Idaho, and that's what we're working towards. I'd like to thank our financial support, both USDA NIFA as well as the ISDA Specialty Crop Block Grant as well. And just end, I was down at the World Potato Congress. This is an elevation about 12,000 feet in the potato park down there in Peru. Just a beautiful area, and so I thought I'd leave you with that slide there. So, thank you very much.
Any questions for Rick?
Yeah, we're right here.
Yeah.
Yeah, Western russet is a really good parent for susceptibility for nematodes, but it's also really susceptible to early blight and untones. Why are you, what's the redeeming factor there that makes it a good susceptible parent other than susceptible?
It's got some earlier maturing too, and it does have, as a parent, it's a good parent for getting the long tuber type and the russet. And that's pretty unusual, and I think that's showing Western russet helping us to get to that market class. But you're right, I mean, there is some, it's not a perfect parent, but we can work, first of all, we need to get to that market class, and then we can work further on sometimes you work with what you have and you have to move quickly, so that was our thought on this. Yes?
I've got a question about New York 121. I'm surprised to see its relative resistance to pallida. He was breeding for R01 and R02 resistance. Is that the reason you think, or do you have any insights to why there might be that market resistance to pallida?
Well, I think Joe could comment on that with the RO2 marker there.
Yeah, I think NY 121 came out of the earlier work from Brody and Plastic, working with Maria Skura in Peru, and brought in some of the pallida resistance from down there. But you're right, Walter has focused on R01 or 2 resistance, and in that sense has not been testing for pallida resistance for all these years, but it was carried along.
Serendipity.
But you're showing his marker, which is, he's identified for RO2.
Well, and the RO2 marker identified associated with both RO2 resistance and pallida resistance, so it just happened to get 2 for 1.
Yeah,
So it may be doing double duty